As vintners focus on making wines more expressive of their site, with greater freshness, intensity, and power, the old labels no longer apply. Wine professionals love to place bodegas on a continuum from classic to modern, but most Rioja bodegas today are not so easily categorized. For the sommeliers on the trip, their initial notions about Rioja were about to be tested. Whether traipsing through a vineyard with Agustin Santolaya of Rota, or touring a bodega with Jorge Muga of Bodegas Muga, these young wine stewards encountered some surprisingly progressive philosophies about winemaking in the 21st century.
It's kind of hard to be an accomplished sommelier and not be aware of Rioja. I think they all came to Rioja with their own notions of what it was, their own preconceived notions. But as with any kind of first-hand look of a special place in the world, they got a deeper understanding. They got to see the kind of love and personality behind the wines. And I think they were probably most surprised by just how expansive the region was and how diverse the styles of wine. And I think they also realized that that you can't just divide wines into traditional and modern category. There are a lot of spaces in between.
I think Americans think more about the old style Rioja, whereas, coming here, I thought it was maybe 50-50 as new style versus old style, but I think it's very much turned to maybe a handful of producers who are really hanging on to this traditional style, and most have kind of moved on to the modern style. But some of the best wines that we've tasted, I think, have been some of those older wines that are very elegant. Not to say that there aren't some great ones that are in the new style as well.
With Marqués de Riscal, there again an example of a prominent Rioja producer who understands and appreciates how wonderful the traditional wines are, but at the same time is excited about presenting new wines in this modern style that have a different purpose, which is different, that have a different purpose, but one that is no less one of quality. So I think that that's very exciting, and it shows the dynamism that you find in Rioja.
For most wine professionals who follow Rioja, it's not difficult to describe the features of a rigorously traditional bottling or an ultra-modern one. The challenge is that so many Rioja wines fall between those two extremes.
I would say the traditional style is generally aged in American oak, generally aged for a lot longer, generally has less color than, say, the modern style, a bit more focus on acidity and so-called tertiary flavors, kind of earthy, mushroomy flavors that are a little funky and maybe not for everybody, but that are revered, almost like a cult. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have modern wines of great extraction, which is to say extracted color, extracted fruit, very forward, up front, lush. And these are wines that tend to be aged in French oak. They tend to come from more singular plantings as opposed to blends that coming in from all over the region. And they're wines that, raise eyebrows, that, as I like to call them. These are eyebrow-raising wines. They usually get a lot of critical attention. They usually come in heavy bottles, and some of them are absolutely dynamite. Now, between these two extremes, there are quite a few variations. Some people who use French oak and American oak. Some who decide not to cold macerate before fermentation, others who do. But there's a whole spectrum in there. It's not just black and white.
Hoy, esa dicotomía entre Rioja clásico y Rioja moderno ya prácticamente ha desaparecido. Es decir, te diría que a los que fuimos revolucionarios hace 20 años, hoy se nos ha asumido como algo normal. Nosotros no revolucionábamos nada, simplemente nos reencontrábamos con nuestras raíces.
When you say Rioja, I mean, in terms of a style of wine, a lot of wine writers and a lot of people in the wine trade like to fall back on really hackneyed terms like modern, traditional, classic. Why? Because we don't really have a language to describe 1,000 different kinds of wines in terms of style and character. And in fact, that's what you have in Rioja. You've got everything from, Our López de Heredia, which is the most classical, traditional bodega in Spain, And then at the other end, you've got like Rota, or there's a few others. You might say Finca Allende. But to label the wines as traditional, modern, it kind of does them a disservice. Miguel Angel de Gregorio, in an interview, he said, there's no such thing as modern and classical or traditional. There's only good wines and lesser wines. I think that's the reason, that's the context we need to look at Rioja in, because there literally are. I mean, when you look at Arlopez de Heredias, when you look at the old Viña Reals from Cuney, and I'm talking about the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, Bodegas Riojanas, Monte Real, the La Rioja Alta, and those classical wine, Riojas are like Burgundies. They're beautiful. I describe the 64 Viña Tandonia as a Bach cantata. That's how it is. And then at the other end, the modern ones are powerful and rich, and I mean they have as much horsepower as the heaviest wines from Toro and Ribera del Duero. So, everything in between. It's a difficult region to get your mind around, to say, well, this is this, or this is this. Well, it's many things.
Well, what's really interesting today is, you do have a number of bodegas in Rioja that are traditional, and you have a number that are upstarts and are solely modern. But then you also have a number of bodegas which are sort of playing both sides of the coin. When it comes to the modern bodegas, I'd say that some of my favorites might be Ramirez de Ganuza, which just produces incredible handcrafted wines. Allende, which I think is at the forefront, producing, in particular, a wine of place in their Calvario. This is, a new thing happening in Rioja, whereas before you always had a blending, or oftentimes you'd have a blending of wines from the different parts of Rioja to make a more complex whole. Now you have people saying, in a Burgundian way, there are sites, there are specific sites with very old vines, and let's concentrate on that. And so Allende is one of the modern producers who's doing that, and I think that's very interesting. On the traditional side, you have the wines of Cuney, you have La Rioja Alta, and obviously you have the wines of Lopez Heredia, where Maria Jose will tell you there's no reason to change her grandfather's ways. It would be a sign of disrespect. A winery that is that would probably give many Australian winemaker a heart attack if they were to walk into it. There is no stainless steel. There are no polished floors. There are lots of cobwebs and spiders, which are good for deterring the spider mites, I'm told.